Thank you so much for joining us today for the third in our series of Creating Customer Love Stories. Today we'll be talking about making sure we anchor our strategy in understanding. So, Deanna, can we have the next slide? Thank you. So just before we get started, I would like to take a few minutes and let you know some housekeeping items. So we will have Q&A following the presentation. However, if you have questions about the content as we go along, please use the chat panel to the right of your console, and we'll make sure we address those. Following today's webinar, we'll make sure you get a copy of the report that Deanna has authored, as well as the slides and a link to the recording so that you can share it with your organization. And don't forget to register for our last in the series, which will be coming up March the 31st. And you can register for that at customerlovestories.com. And if you'd like to engage with us on social media, you can follow us at nice_CX. And we're using the hashtag CXLoveStories. We can go to the next slide. So I'm Sheridan Horn. I'll be your host today, and I am the Director of Product Marketing here at NICE, and I am joined by Deanna Loffer, who is going to be our presenter. She's a Senior Analyst and in the Customer Experience Practice at Forrester. And if you'd like to engage with us on Twitter, you have me at Sheridan Orr and Deanna at Deanna Loffer. And without any further ado, I will hand it over to Deanna to illuminate us on how we can anchor our strategies in customer understanding. Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheridan, and thanks everyone who has joined us so far. I am an analyst in customer experience at Forrester, and I research best practices about how organizations develop the visions for their customer experience and then strategies and roadmaps that come out of that. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today, something that I researched for several months at the end of last year and came out with this report about really what is a type of customer research and customer understanding that you need to build an effective customer experience strategy. So just some quick notes about what the agenda is going to be for the next 30 minutes or so of the webinar. First, I'll talk about why customer understanding is so fundamental and why a lot of firms that I researched aren't collecting the right types of customer data today, or if they are, they aren't using it appropriately. And then I'll give you some tips about how to match the right types of customer research to the right phase of your strategy development process, because there is an alignment there that I found that best-in-class companies have. And then finally, I have some tips about how to make customer insight-driven business decisions a norm. So it's not just when you're developing your strategy, it's using that information and making it part of everyday decision-making. So first, I want to share an example from Virgin Mobile Australia. They were thinking about the plans that they were offering to their customers, and they thought that, or they assumed that more choice in mobile plans was inherently attractive to their customers, right? Who wouldn't want more choice in what their plan was getting? But they did some diary studies to help make sure that this actually was what customers wanted. And what customers were saying is that when they were choosing a mobile plan, they wanted to feel like they were being in control. But they didn't really know what control meant. And one person during this diary study said, "I feel like I'm out of control when I'm cooking without a recipe. I don't know what I'm doing. It makes me feel like I'm not getting the best possible results. I know the ingredients that I have at hand would make a nice dish, but I cannot get there." Now, before this study, Virgin Mobile thought control meant giving customers options to modify their contracts based on their individual needs. And to that end, the company was about to move from 19 standard billing plans, which is what they had, to a system where customers could slice and dice hundreds of different plan features any way they wanted, like a giant telecom salad bar. But the diaries indicated that infinite options weren't actually what customers wanted at all. To customers, control meant having a greater understanding of a smaller number of choices. And this was a critical insight, and it's something that they wouldn't have gotten if they had relied on what they thought their customers wanted instead of doing that research. So instead of giving them an infinite number of options, they designed a solution that combined structured guidance with a limited number of options, and the result was that customer satisfaction increased by 10% in about 7 months. But great customer experiences don't just increase customer satisfaction, they also impact the bottom line through better customer loyalty. And in fact, at Forrester, we found that customer experience drives 3 types of loyalty. The first is retention loyalty, which is the likelihood that a customer will keep its existing business with you. The second is enrichment loyalty, which is the likelihood that a customer will buy additional products or services from you. They'll spend more. And third is advocacy loyalty, which is the likelihood that a customer will recommend the company to others, which may in turn mean that those folks choose to do business with you. But unfortunately, most firms aren't doing enough today to understand their customers to the point where they can design great experiences that are going to give them those loyalty benefits. And organizations that lack a clear understanding of what customers want and how the company is performing against those expectations run the risk of implementing expensive solutions without even knowing the trade-offs that they're making or without even knowing if customers are going to like those solutions. And part of the reason for that is because firms rely primarily on surveys and just the quantitative information in surveys to inform their customer experience visions. We asked over 200 customer experience professionals what type of customer research influences development of these visions, and that's the chart that I'm showing you right now. We asked about more quantitative methods like surveys and market research, qualitative methods like customer interviews, focus groups, unsolicited feedback, those kinds of things. And what we found is that evaluative techniques that collect quantitative data like surveys, yes, they are the workhorse of customer experience measurement, and they're the most popular technique today to support customer experience strategy. And they are good at some things. They're great for assessing customer attitudes in response to well-defined questions. But they're not enough to break what I have termed the status quo feedback loop and gain insight into what customers are actually missing in an experience. It's like if I went to a store and they sent me a survey asking about my experience when I came in to return a shirt. Maybe that experience is fine, or maybe there are things where they can improve it. But what they're missing is that I'd rather not come into the store to return the shirt at all. I'd rather they send me a packing label so I can send it back by mail, or maybe improve the size guides online so I don't order the wrong size next time. And a lot of times, often that extra information that gets at the actual problem isn't available in a 5-question structured survey. So that's what I mean about breaking the status quo. In order to break this loop, you need to allow customers to provide alternate feedback, like through unstructured feedback, or use different research methods that break you out of this loop. But most companies aren't doing that today. Going back to that chart that I was showing you, companies are mostly relying on relationship or transactional surveys, and they pay a high price because we found, you can see in the dark blue bar, firms that have extremely or moderately effective customer experience programs, and firms in the light blue bar have slightly effective customer experience programs, or those that haven't made a difference, and that is self-reported. But we found that firms that say that they have more effective customer experience programs conduct more types of customer research, including things like unsolicited feedback and customer interviews, and at a higher frequency to inform their strategies than firms with only slightly or ineffective programs. So the bottom line is to fuel potent customer experience strategies that are going to resonate with customers. You need to pair qualitative approaches that allow you to infer the why of customer behavior in addition to the what and the how that quantitative approaches reveal. And that's the key, pairing these different approaches and using them at the right time to help inform the customer experience that you design for your customers. But before I get to what that pairing is, I want to talk about what are these different types of customer research methods and what do they entail. And Forrester has grouped customer research and feedback methods into 3 categories that we've called exploratory, evolutionary, and evaluative. And exploratory, that first category, this is research that's used to identify unmet needs. They include qualitative techniques like ethnography, open-ended interviews, focus groups, and contextual inquiry. And these types of things provide insights into behaviors, motivations, desires, emotions. Researchers use these techniques to understand a problem that's not yet clearly defined, things that you can't ask about in a survey because you don't know really what to ask. And oftentimes it provides the groundwork for future research. So for example, when an agency that was working with USC on overhauling their research library website to improve access to library resources, its researchers interviewed undergraduate students and graduate students, faculty, alumni, a bunch of different audiences to understand the needs of each group and the context for how they conducted library research today. And rather than each group having disparate needs, which is what they thought, they found that there were really just 2 types of archetypes of researchers: novice researchers who didn't really know what to do and would probably, rather search on Google than use the library website, and advanced researchers that actually did know, they were a little savvier about using the website. And because they only had these two archetypes, they were able to put the resources to designing a website prototype that met these 2 needs. And this was something that they didn't really understand before they did all of these interviews. Now, the second type of research is evolutionary research, and this helps define and validate concepts. So if you think of this on a spectrum, exploratory is more broad, evolutionary is more directed research, like I say in the table there, to validate and flesh out concepts. And the methods to do this type of research are collaborative design workshops, surveys, things that help sharpen an idea as it evolves. And used at different points in the design cycle, these methods can help refine and test hypotheses and provide data for statistical inference. So let me give you an example here too. After conducting exploratory research to understand what were the pain points in the client journey, BCA Animal Hospitals, which runs a bunch of pet hospitals across the country, they then used customer satisfaction surveys and revenue data to validate long-standing issues that they found in those focus groups and determine whether or not performance on those had a financial impact on the business. And so, for example, they found that while clients said that hospital wait times were important, the historical data indicated that wait times had no impact on revenue, so the pain point was deprioritized compared with other client needs. So this can help really validate, for example, how big a problem is something and whether it has an impact on financials. Now, finally, evaluative research assesses and improves a specific touch point. This is probably the most focused of the 3. It includes both observational techniques like usability studies or app usage data, as well as self-reported research from surveys or online panels. And this research can be both quantitative and qualitative. So a quick example, when the customer experience team at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island was designing a new explanation of benefits form, it tested new statement designs with its online customer panel and found that a statement with a watermark presented the least confusion for its members. So this type of research often involves prototype and testing. And a lot of companies I found often want to jump right up to this. They want to build the product, they want to build the design, they want to test it. But the problem with this is if you jump right up to this stage before doing the earlier stages, you don't know that you're solving for the right problem. So that's why we have this cadence of research. The key to developing a sound strategy is employing the right types of research at the right time so that the process first diverges and then converges as the company explores and tests and finally chooses and implements its customer experience value proposition. And this kind of process should give folks the confidence that they need to progress through each phase by infusing the right types of customer insights at the right time. So going a little bit deeper into what types of research you can do in each of these phases and some more examples. In the first phase, you want to conduct qualitative research to uncover the business problem. And here's where you would use that first category of techniques I talked about, exploratory research, to divulge customers' perceptions of the current state experience and provide insight into future state experiences that they might actually want. So using VCA animal hospitals as an example again, they started their strategy research by interviewing internal stakeholders about what they thought the client's customer journey looked like. And then after they developed these sort of rough journey maps based on internal stakeholders, they took these out to the field and validated them with a cross-section of clients across geographies and settings. And what they found was that clients and employees held differing views of where the pet health journey began and ended. For example, employees would think the journey started when someone walked into the hospital with their pet because that's the first part that they see, whereas clients, the pet health journey begins when they think their dog is sick and they're trying to decide, okay, do I need to go into the vet? How serious is this? Where's the number for the vet? When can I come in? And because of this dissonance, a big part of VCA's employee training centered on improving clients' experience before they even stepped foot in the hospital. So when they actually did come in, they were reassured that the hospital was going to do everything that they could to take care of their pet in the best way possible. Another example of the types of research you want to do to uncover the business problem is from KPMG that worked with a tax preparation software vendor. Now, early on, they hypothesized that customers wanted an easy button for their taxes, right? Who wouldn't want your taxes to be easy? But after doing interviews with tax preparers, the interviews revealed that actually they didn't want their taxes to be easy, because if it was easy, how could they be confident that the software was doing the correct thing, right? Taxes aren't an easy thing. And so what they found was that the tax preparers they talked to actually wanted a more nuanced thing. They wanted a frictionless experience that understood their unique financial position. How were they different? And so when they were updating the software and making changes, they instituted a bunch of design changes in that vein of creating a frictionless experience. And one of the changes, for example, was providing customers with a list of life events that had certain tax implications up front, like buying a new home or having a child, and that in turn streamlined the experience on the back end. And after redesigning the software around this goal that they found out of customers, they were able to increase their digital conversion by about 7.5% and saw customer review scores increase by 16%, not to mention that folks probably were spending less time because they were answering all these questions up front. So understanding what they really wanted from their tax software had benefits both for the customers using it and obviously for the company that saw better conversion and better review scores. And a final example in this area comes from Entergy, which is an energy company in the southern U.S. They wanted to uncover and improve how power outages were making customers feel. So they used something called a metaphor elicitation technique. Its researchers asked customers, they showed them a series of pictures, and they asked customers which picture best described their relationship with a company during a power outage. And they found that many customers chose a photo of a steel door, which signaled that they had no control over the situation and Entergy wasn't listening to their concerns during the outage. And so by focusing their strategy and their improvements in the customer experience space on giving customers the feeling of control in their relationship with the company, like by providing proactive communications during a power outage, Entergy rose to the top 5 for utilities in the J.D. Power rankings the next year. So this was a technique that they found really useful to really understand what their customers wanted. And another point on this was that they initially didn't think that there was a problem during power outages because they had been tracking the number of angry calls that people had made during an outage or just calls notifying. And they actually found that the number of calls they were getting were decreasing, and they thought it was because people weren't as upset or they were finding other resources. And when they actually did the research and the interviews, they actually found out it was that people were so annoyed with the company that they just stopped calling in at all. They had basically given up. And that was something that they weren't going to get just from the numbers that they only got from doing these interviews. So that was another insight that they got by doing this kind of technique. So once you've validated customer needs and expectations, you need a way to narrow down the hundreds and sometimes thousands of ideas and touch points that you could prioritize to focus on to improve. And so in this second phase of developing your customer experience strategy and your roadmap, you can benefit from quantitative research to help prioritize opportunities and pain points. And so an example of how FedEx did this, they undertook a large study to make sure that they were prioritizing resources best to meet customer needs, and to also lay the foundation for future customer experience initiatives and focusing on their marketing communications. And the first stage of the study was qualitative. They conducted focus groups with consumers and shippers and identified around 100 important attributes of the FedEx experience, things like whether drop boxes are conveniently located, whether drivers have a positive attitude, the availability of shipping locations that are staffed, and whether packages are received at a consistent time each day. And they, like I said, they identified around 100 attributes that people in the focus groups raised as important, but they needed to know more to prioritize action on these different areas of the experience. So they first worked internally with stakeholders to narrow these attributes down to about 50, and then included those in a consumer survey. And they conducted conjoint analysis on the results of the survey, which prioritized the relative importance of each of these 50 attributes based on its effect on customer satisfaction and on market share relative to their competitors. And this narrowed down list provided the foundation for future customer experience initiatives and ensured that FedEx was prioritizing resources to best meet customers' needs. And this actually leads us to another benefit of doing quantitative analysis at this point. It can be used to size market opportunities to justify investment. So using the model it built, FedEx was able to predict how each respondent on the survey would act in different situations and what their share of wallet would be given their perception of FedEx and as well as other brands that they used. And they were able to predict the potential upside and downside for FedEx on each attribute and whether FedEx should then invest in that attribute. Like, does long hours at a store make sense, or how important is scheduling consistent delivery time in terms of whether that is going to improve market share relative to other competitors. And doing this type of quantitative work at this point can help make the validation for moving forward with some of these initiatives. So finally, after identifying the core areas of your customer experience strategy, customer experience pros should continue to conduct research to test and validate designs and reprioritize issues and initiatives if necessary. So going back to Entergy, the company I mentioned earlier that we talked about, the metaphor elicitation, they also manage a 2,500 person customer online panel to test specific concepts for their experience. So for example, they held 5 sessions with customers over a 2-week period about the features and benefits of a proposed smart metering system, and also used the panel to prototype and test new proactive communications around power outages. And they estimate that they were actually able to cut development costs for these types of things, specifically for the outage communications, by at least half, because the customer insight helped reduce the amount of trial and error that was typical of technology development efforts. So that goes back to what I said earlier. You don't want to undertake these costly investments in improving the experience if you don't think that customers are going to use it. And so they were able to use this customer panel and justify the cost of the customer panel because they saw it cut down on costs in development time. And doing this type of research and prototyping can also help you continue to make sure that you're set on the right direction. a digital agency that I've spoken with, Vocal, they partnered with Parch, which is a startup to develop a cashless valet parking app. And the idea behind it was that it would improve the experience of valet parking for customers because they could request their car while they're still sitting at dinner, know exactly when it arrived, don't have to wait outside in the cold. They can go outside right when the car gets pulled up, and they can pay without cash, right? You don't necessarily have cash on you all the time. And so the company tested this initial prototype by watching diners and club goers download and use the app at valet parking stands all around Chicago. And they also witnessed the degree to which valet stands welcomed this new cashless system. And that was actually the major hurdle to growing the business because, as you can imagine, not all valet stands wanted to give up their cash-based business. And what they realized was that whether valets accepted the system or not would be the key to growing the business, not necessarily how many consumers were downloading using the app. And another thing that they found was that valets were more accepting of the app if Parch provided them with a companion enterprise platform to track pricing, wait times, and revenue, so that they got a benefit too. And this was something that was on Parch's roadmap, but because this was such an important constituency, they actually reprioritized their roadmap to shift focus to valet companies while gradually adding the end user features to the consumer app. So doing this kind of ongoing research helped them figure out what their roadmap needed to be. So that's why doing this continuous research is so important. So we've talked about the type of customer research and feedback that you need to support your customer experience vision and strategy. But your investment and use of research shouldn't end there. And I think many of you know this, but customer insights are part and parcel of ongoing design, measurement, prioritization, culture transformation, all of these key things to make your company more customer-centric. So while conducting customer research during the strategy work, you can lay the foundation for continued use of customer insights in a few ways and make customer-centric business decisions the norm. One way to do that is using customer research to identify customer-centric ways to measure success. Now, I know that sounds kind of vague, so let me give you a few examples. A cable operator used customer journey mapping to identify and prioritize various touch points in the experience that it needed to improve. And it rated the quality of the experience at each touch point. But in order to measure progress, it also identified relevant performance metrics that they were already collecting, things like support ticket volume and sentiment that map to each touch point. And by monitoring these additional sources of insight, it provided them a scorecard to measure success and progress in achieving the vision, and also justified making future investments. And they were able to do this by figuring out, okay, what kind of feedback are we already collecting, what kind of insights are we already collecting, and then looking at touch points that didn't have those and trying to figure out what additional investments they would have to make to gain those insights. Similarly, Andrew Reese Consulting, which is a consulting company that specializes in customer experience, they designed a quantitative survey for a healthcare client to validate findings from customer interviews during this initial strategy development phase. But the healthcare company actually turned that into an annual survey to gauge progress toward achieving its multi-year initiative roadmap. So they took that initial investment and just made it an annual survey. So another nice way to keep abreast of progress in achieving your vision. So the second thing you can do and should do is share the value of customer research with other stakeholders in your company. The customer experience team at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island invites stakeholders from across the company, including people from product strategy, marketing, analytics, web operations, even executives, to in-person customer focus groups because they are so costly and you can't hold them that frequently. So they want to make sure that everybody is getting value out of them. They found that the first few focus groups had limited participation from these outside teams, but once word got around about how valuable it was to hear the voice of the customer directly from their mouth, then attendance really skyrocketed, and the third and fourth focus groups that they held were packed. And it didn't hurt that they brought food to entice people to come. So definitely have food if you're going to do that. But do share your research with others, and that means that other folks in your company, if there's people in marketing that have their own research, are going to be more inclined to share it with you as well if you were sitting somewhere else. And the third thing is make customers your collaborators. Involve them as much as possible early when you're starting research efforts, follow up later, use them for design and testing. I would also say most customers like to engage and provide feedback. For example, because people are passionate about their pets, VCA Animal Hospital says that it's easy to engage their clients in providing feedback, but folks in less alluring companies can turn their customers into valuable partners as well. Penske, the trucking company, their chief customer officer calls customers himself to recruit them for research interviews and finds that most of them are more than willing to share their thoughts, especially when they receive the call directly from him. So to receive continued support from customers, you should establish trust in 3 ways. First, only ask customers things they can affect. What I mean is if you keep asking customers about the same thing over and over, like would you like a certain fee cut, but you have no intention of doing that, don't ask them. Don't ask about things that aren't going to happen. It's just going to frustrate them. Second, thank them for their assistance. Simple thanks goes a long way. And finally, share how their feedback advances improvement. Starbucks runs a website called My Starbucks Idea where customers can suggest improvements to the Starbucks experience. And they get tons of ideas. Customers can vote on them. And then Starbucks actually shares back with customers which ideas were put into action. So you know those little green things that you can put in the top of the paper cup so your coffee doesn't spill? That came from My Starbucks Idea. Cake pops came from My Starbucks Idea. So Starbucks has been in the forefront of making their customers their collaborators, and because of that, they get a lot of valuable feedback without really having to even pay for it. So I know I've talked a lot, and with that, thanks so much for joining and for NICE for inviting me to talk about my research. Like we said at the top, my research report is going to be available with this webinar. It has a lot more examples related to this topic if this is something that you are interested in. And if you want to hear more about customer experience from Forrester, we put out a weekly podcast called CXcast. It's totally free content. Anyone can subscribe. We speak to a Forrester analyst or an outside guest about customer experience best practices. They're typically about 15 minutes each, so perfect for your commute. And you can search for it on iTunes or your favorite podcast app or use the link that's on this slide. So that's enough plugging of my research. Thank you so much, and happy to open it up to questions now.
Great, Deanna. We already have a few. So great presentation, and the report is amazing. So I definitely recommend you reading it once you get it in your email. But the first one I have is probably one that many have, is what happens if you don't have a large research department, you're limited budget, limited staff? How can you do some of this in a more agile approach?
Thank you. That's a great question, and that's probably one of the top challenges that I came across when I was talking to companies for this research. One thing I would say is that folks are often in the mindset when you're doing surveys that you need thousands of completes, right? You need thousands of customers, otherwise it's not valid. When you're doing more open-ended research, like interviews, you typically only need 5 to 10 or even 20. Because you're just trying to understand what are the real problems, and you don't need thousands of people to tell you that. Usually a couple is enough. So that's not a huge investment. There's also guerrilla, we call it guerrilla marketing. There's guerrilla approaches to collecting this kind of information. You can approach people on the street. That's something that a lot of healthcare companies I've talked to have done. One that I talked to actually attended a community blood drive and pulled people aside and say, hey, we're testing out new IVR systems. Would you be willing to call in and help test it? So they were able to get people to help test this totally for free. I talked about using customer panels. They are a little bit pricey still. One company told me that theirs was about $10,000, but that's still cheaper than doing in-person focus groups where you have to invite customers in. You have to find a location. If you don't have a location on site, you have to feed people. So actually, Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield said that having this standing panel cuts down on recruitment costs, and they can gain customer insight at almost half the cost and bring ideas to market faster. And then the final sort of interesting thing that I heard was from a design agency, Liquid, also in lieu of formal focus groups. They hold what they call customer dinners or friendship dinners. They hold them in a restaurant or a home where customers are invited to share feedback over a meal. They still have a moderator there to host the dinner, but they don't use, but without having to rent a facility or without costly customer incentives, they can host these dinners about 4 times faster and for a fraction of the cost of typical focus groups. So instead of doing no research, even if your research team is like you and one other person, think about how you can do it in an agile way, or even repurposing insights you're already getting, like from your Voice of the Customer program. A lot of companies have tons of research in the Voice of the Customer programs and marketing programs and product development. You're just not aware of it. So, go out and find what other people are doing and see if you can partner up and get some of this research. But don't not do anything. Just think about how you can do it in a more agile way.
Great, and you led us into the Voice of the Customer program, which we've had questions about. How do you make sure that you're getting the most out of your Voice of the Customer program and layering it in this qualitative research?
Yeah, so Voice of the Customer programs play a large role in this, and they're a key source of insight for a lot of companies. And oftentimes, looking at Voice of the Customer data is a great way to get started in developing a strategy, because you can use the data to assess the current state of the experience today. So are customers generally happy with you with different touch points like web or customer service? If not, where is their heat in terms of complaints? You might need to go beyond the Voice of the Customer data that you have when you're thinking about designing future experiences. But a lot of companies and consultants that do strategy work, they actually look at Voice of the Customer data that they have already and use that as a starting point for figuring out, okay, how much extra research do we need to do? What do we know from the Voice of the Customer data, from quantitative insights and unstructured data that we're getting about sentiment, and then what extra research do we need to do? And then later on, the Voice of the Customer feedback becomes a great way to assess whether the strategy and new improvements are working, because you can see, whether those changes are getting a positive feedback or not. So if you don't have a Voice of the Customer program in place, put it in place now and start tracking metrics. That can be a way to monitor success.
Great. Thank you so much. And if we can go to the next slide, please make sure you join us on the 31st for the critical link between emotions and customer loyalty with Megan Burns, also from Forrester, and that will be the final in our series for creating customer love stories. But you can also get all of the reports and all of the recordings if you contact us in response to the email we're going to send you. And then finally, if you're going to be in Orlando and you'd like to see Peyton Manning, join us May 23rd through the 25th for our Customer Interactions event. So thank you again, Deanna. We've had great feedback on this session already.
Sure, my pleasure.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.